Teenagers of Reddit, what did you think was part of puberty but really something else? Regular nosebleeds. Turns out my allergies don't like the humid air. My nose starts randomly gushing blood in the winter, it doesn't like dry air lol. When I was young I slept over at my friend's house. Woke up with my boxers soaked. I was so embarrassed that I had a wet dream for the first time, not even at my own house. Turns out I just pissed myself. And that's why you pee before bed, kids. Sheer exhaustion. Turns out anemia is common in teenage girls, especially when you have irregular heavy periods. I had this too. Looking at pictures from that time, I am shocked at how little color there was in my face. It's really scary. I'm a girl and grew a beard. Thought it was puberty but turns out I'm just Portuguese. Well, now I feel you, I'm from northern Morocco and those Mediterranean genes are kicking in. Harry asked to frown. Growing up I was really close with my cousin. We were the same age, lived in the same neighborhood, went to the same school, and had the same group of friends. I remember during junior high school he changed quite a bit, and at the time I didn't have the mental or emotional capacity to wonder why or figure out on a deep level what could have been happening. He used to be very fun, jovial, and enjoyed hanging out with me and my friends. Suddenly around the time we turned 11 or so, he became much quieter, preferred to keep to himself, and started becoming a lot more introverted. I figured that at that time we were all going through puberty, and as we learned in class, as our bodies change, so can other parts of our personalities. I figured, hey, I never liked girls before, but suddenly I want nothing more than to hang out with girls, and so he probably had a similar change, only with regards to his social preferences. I only recently found out, 20 years later, that his father got heavy into alcohol right around that time, and he abused him, definitely physically and verbally, possibly sexually. He didn't quite go there and I didn't push. His father ultimately left his family, and the story we were told at the time was that he was traveling for business but that everything was fine. So we had no choice but to accept this. It breaks my heart that at that time I could have been there for him, but I had no idea something deep was happening that was causing a fundamental change to my cousin's personality. I just assumed he was going through some natural changes and that his natural personality was coming out. But it turns out the worst thing that could happen to a child, having your parent abuse you, was happening, and that was the reason for his sudden change. When I was a teenager, I always thought that having resentment towards my mom, single parent, was normal for that phase in life. Everyone told me I was just an overreactive teenager, going through changes, hypersensitive, and it would pass and one day I'll realize how lucky I am to have her. While I agree, she was a good mom, I still harbor a lot of resentment toward her over a lot of things, and my family was extremely toxic and would consistently diminish my feelings to make themselves feel better. It wasn't just a teenage mess of emotions, these were real problems that my mom couldn't be bothered with. It was more important for her to be the victim, and that hasn't changed still 20 years later. Most people are on the outside looking in, and don't hear both sides of the story. Sometimes the smallest thing can lead to a life of depression, anxiety and self-deprecating. In other words, you're not just finding yourself as a teenager. Life comes with constant growth and realizations. Don't ignore your instinct because everyone is telling you otherwise. Had a horrible pain in my right arm. If someone even grazed up against it, it would feel like I got shot. It would also flare up at night, leading to many sleepless nights. I had multiple doctor visits and it was always just chalked up to growing pains. After dealing with it for 2 years, a doctor finally did an X-ray and found a, thankfully benign, bone tumor. Oh wow. When I was about 14 I started to hear a crazy amount of people yelling at me inside my head. I would just be sitting on my bed or something and it would absolutely overcome me. I heard my parents and siblings and friends all at the same time yell at me things I've actually heard the week before, and then everything in real life would be moving super fast and there was no way I could trick my mind into moving slow. I would actually move slowly but it would make it worse and I would just have to lay there and nothing would help. I attribute it to panic attacks but no one has ever been able to help diagnose it. I get extremely bad pains in my legs, which was suspected to be growth pains. Multiple doctor visits later, without my mother as she never believed me, and I was told I have very weak tissues in my legs that often tear or get inflamed, and had to start physio to try build them up more. My mother still thinks I'm lying, even though I have been diagnosed by professionals. It hurts. Insanely heavy, painful period. Massive weight gain. Being uncontrollably mean to my mom and then crying because I didn't know why I was being mean to my mom. My puberty was so bad my mom took me to all kinds of doctors. She felt like I was possessed and also dying. I physically could not get out of bed on my period. Turns out I have PMDD, bipolar disorder and an underactive thyroid. I went on birth control at 11 to control the bleeding and mood swings. Mood stabilizers around 13 and then thyroid meds at 15 and life was much better. Glad you were able to get the help you needed at such a young age. I'm sure those times were really rough, but thank goodness things were looked after by medical professionals and your life improved. I was feeling a very large disconnect from everyone around me, especially people my age. I constantly visualized being in a bubble separate from everyone else, and I had a hard time having conversations. But I just thought it was puberty, because I didn't want to self-diagnose, and I figured everyone else felt the same. Turns out it was Aspergers. Not having a period for 8 months. Don't let any doctor tell you that's normal. For that long you'll eventually find out you actually have PCOS. Skeptical. Yeah, PCOS is so damn common yet so ignored or just not even thought of. Or they just don't care. My doctor didn't even bother to try and help me understand it or offer treatment. She was just like, yeah, you have PCOS, bye. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 28 either. Ridiculous. Losing the vividness and emotion of life. I thought society cherished and glorified childhood so much because everything feels so much more real and vivid back then. Turns out I just have a condition called derealization law. Edit. A lot of people have misjudged my meaning with this. Naturally, you do lose a lot of the emotions you feel as a child as you grow older, and that is not what I'm talking about. I mean that I have an actual disorder, but I just chalked it down to that. By losing the vividness I mean literally losing the vividness, like physically losing the vividness of life in my eyesight and hearing and being able to think clearly. I'm not saying that what some of you are experiencing isn't a big deal, because it definitely could be, it's just not derealization. Smile. Dislocation of my kneecaps. Turns out that the groove in the leg they are supposed to sit in isn't fully developed or is too small or something, since it's happened twice. First time I did it everyone was like, yeah, it happens around this age. Being sick every morning for years. Not sure what I thought it was, I just assumed everyone else woke up feeling terrible as well. Turns out I have horrible anxiety that was manifesting physically by making me nauseous. I used to get morning sickness anytime I woke up early. Like I was pregnant. For years. It started in puberty. Maybe anxiety contributed. Although I also am a complete night owl too, and it only happens if I attempt to do early mornings. Bit of TMI, I started puberty early. So around the age of 10 I started having extreme pains all over in my body. Before that I was always aching all over. I was covered in bruises and scrapes periodically my whole life. That doesn't mean I didn't know something was obviously wrong. My mother told me it was growing pains among a slew of other things to shut me up. I got used to not telling anyone I was in pain because I didn't want to be bitching all the time and be annoying. Uncountable doctor's appointments later, at the age of 14 I was taken to the hospital to have a nerve conductive study, NCS. Turns out I have CNT. Being always afraid is to talk to people, planning every word I will say to make sure I will not make any error, looking at every single detail of them to make sure I am not saying anything wrong. Turns out I have social anxiety. I have this sometimes, but do you ever do that thing where after you talk to someone and then you feel like you messed up or said something stupid, then you think of all the outcomes and what they'll say about it to you? So you think up a bunch of responses? Then a few days later you realize you were overreacting and they literally didn't even notice whatever it was, and you just wasted a few minutes of your life.
Make sure to like and subscribe for more stories.